Welcome to Soul Adventure TV, where we explore what may very well be an unprecedented opportunity in humanity's spiritual and physical evolution, and the choices standing before each and every individual to walk on this grand adventure or not. Do we really know who and what we are and what we can choose to be? I'm your host and fellow soul adventurer, Steve Crow.
Today we have with us spiritual author and teacher Michael Rhodes, author of 15 books whose material explores the power of love, oneness, and achieving awakening through connection with our divine potential. Michael's remarkable journey has taken him around the globe, sharing the insights he has gained through a process of personal transformation and connection with nature. So it's with great pleasure that I welcome to Soul Adventure TV our very special guest, Michael Rhodes.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Well, thank you for agreeing to be on the show. I'm been really looking forward to this for the past couple of weeks. I can't wait to get into into love and everything that I know that you love to talk about.
Let's hope we don't disappoint you.
Oh, impossible. So, as I understand it, you grew up in England, but then you eventually at some point moved to Tasmania, which is an island state off the southern coast of Australia. Do I have that right?
That's correct. Yeah, I was born in England, Cambridge, a place where they educate you. And I emigrated. My father was a farmer, and I emigrated his death. And I had a wife and two children, emigrated. I was about 25. Back in the 1960s.
And then you went directly to Tasmania, or did you go elsewhere? Or
no, we went directly to Tasmania. One of the first to fly over there in the immigration. What we called a £10 POM. In other words, we only paid £10 each to immigrate, and the government paid the rest. And we had an old propeller aeroplane.
Wow,
that's 36 hours to get there.
That sounds like quite an adventure.
It was.
Where did your own spiritual journey and connection with nature begin? Was that already taking place in England, or was that?
No, what happens, when you look at it, most people tend to think that we are body personality with a soul, whereas in truth, we're a soul with a body personality. So in England, body personality was all set to become a farmer and, the rest of my life. But the process of emigration was very much more in line with the journey of the soul I am. And so I emigrated for the worst possible decade of the whole of the 20th century to be farming in Tasmania. And I think the adversity, the sheer hardship of it, brought, as it were, body and soul much more into line. And so that's really where my spiritual journey began, when I had questions and would sit out on the paddocks and somehow find I had answers. And every time I applied them, they always seemed to work. Whether I heard it or knew it intuitively, didn't seem to matter. Whatever I tried worked. And gradually, I changed my whole way of living. I became an organic farmer, and it was so natural to me. I soaked it up, and it wasn't long before I was touring and lecturing on organic farming in Tasmania. And in those days, that was not what you did at all. That was bad stuff. And I actually had a government file on me as being an agitator.
Oh.
Organic farming.
Oh my God! What a dangerous chap you were. So, was this a sudden awakening, or was it more of a gradual process taking place over years?
It was a process. In my time farming in Tasmania, I had some very interesting experiences that awakened me to the fact that life is far more than we seem to see it. And in one of those processes, I made a commitment. It's rather as though I'll have to just share the process. I farmed on the foothills of Mount Arthur. And I was up there busy on the tractor, and lunchtime I stopped. And I had my lunch, and I noticed it was very quiet. And out in when you're on the foothills of a mountain surrounded by forests, there's always bird call, there's always, excuse me, there's always wind, there's always something like that, sound, but there was nothing, it was silent. And I laid back and thinking about this silence and becoming more silent in my own thoughts. And I looked up in the sky, and there was a big wedge-tailed eagle just hovering around above me, spiraling round and round. And I looked up at it and thought, wow, wouldn't that be something to fly like an eagle? And the next moment I was looking from the eyes of the eagle, down at me, looking up. And it was so still, the stillness held me. And so I didn't sort of lose the experience. And okay, I looked through the eyes of the eagle, and I saw the farm, and I saw a lot of things, and I saw that nature sees through the eyes of immediacy. But what really got me, I saw between me, I was laying near the tractor, and the rest of the forest, there seemed to be a gulf that went deep down into the ground. There was no such thing there, but I saw this immense gulf. And it came immediately to me that this was a gulf of separation. And I was one side and nature was the other. Humanity was one side, nature was the other. And I knew that I needed to cross that gulf. That was my journey, to cross that gulf of separation between nature and self. And with that knowing, the eagle sort of dropped a little bit, and suddenly I was back in my body. And I derided the experience pretty quickly, but it wouldn't leave me. And that and a few other experiences had a profound change on me. One morning I was coming out to milk the cows, about 20 to 5 in the morning, and there's a roundabout I'd made for the children, and I jumped on it and spun round and round. And it suddenly occurred to me, so where am I going with my life? And I realized, well, I'm milking cows. Well, I love cows, but I don't like milking. Why am I doing this? And I knew immediately that fear cracked the whip. And I didn't like that. I did what fear told me to do. And then my thoughts took an unusual direction. So where have I come from? And I didn't mean biologically, and I didn't have an answer. So where am I going to? And I thought, am I going to lay one day in a coffin and look at the lid and think to myself, so what was that all about? And I realized I didn't know where I was going. And then me, that never even thought of such a thing, a question slammed into me rather like an express train hitting. So who am I? And I realized I had no idea. I didn't know who I am. And you know the question, way beyond identity. Who am I? And that and the incident with the eagle and a few other things that happened, I realized that with that question, there was no turning back. I couldn't ignore it. I was 35, and I knew that my life was not going to be a farmer, and that that I had to know the answer to this question: who am I?
So now that you're lecturing, you've authored several books, and you have this connection with nature, this knowing. Uh, where do you think that is coming from? In other words, what do you perceive as the source of the information that you're sharing?
Okay, well, I was just going to say, it took me 15 years to cross that gulf.
Ah,
And when I crossed it, I realized it doesn't exist. There is no gulf of separation, but you have to cross it to know it isn't there. You can't do it intellectually. And then the other thing I realized in hindsight, when I crossed that gulf, it was between identity also and self. So I crossed over from the person I perceive myself to be to who I am. In other words, we have this thing called individuality, which simply means undivided duality. And the divided duality is between the person we are or the being we are, which is, I'll put it this way, immortal, magnificent, metaphysical, multidimensional being of love and light. That's the being we are. And then there is the personality, the identity, the physical, biological person. And I crossed the gulf between those two. And so there was this discovery of self, and that was my awakening, the realization of self. And there was a lot more drama before I got there, but this, in essence, that's what happened. My path was pain and suffering. Don't really recommend it, but if you look at the hospitals, they're full of people on the same path, but they don't even know they're on a path. And so, with that, that's where this inner knowing comes from. You know, the path people are on today is the path of the intellect, and we can use our intellect subconsciously, but the path we were designed to be on is a path of conscious intelligence, and you cannot subconsciously use intelligence. You have to be conscious to use your intelligence. And so the when you're living consciously, then you're in a state where you're connected with life, you're connected with the moment, you're connected with all it is. There is nothing else. Thought takes you away into places that don't exist. Thought never, you can't think your way into the moment, you can only think your way out of it. And so in that place is what I think some of the books call mystical cognition. I call it direct knowing. And so if I need to know something, I focus on it and let go. And within a matter of 24 hours generally, I have the an enormous depth of knowing what I needed to know. But you notice I say need to know. I never do this on a want to know basis. In fact, wants have pretty much disappeared. I don't really have wants today.
So, in this process of discovering what you needed to know, what have you uncovered, or what have you found out that had the biggest impact on you personally?
Hmm. There are many things, Steve.
Yes.
The more I look into life, the deeper I see, the more I realize how much there is to see. But without any doubt, what has had the most profound impact on me is to realize that the only reality of life is love. Now, when I say love, I do not mean a high emotion or what we humans call love. You know, there's what I would call a human level of love, and that's not to be sneered at and not to be dismissed. But then there is something called absolute love or unconditional love. That is not an emotion. You know, an emotion did not create life. And so that absolute love is the power of creation. And when you're loving self, then you are love is creating you in its own image. And yet, amazingly, you are also creating love in the image of self. So we're not talking personality or identity. We're talking that there is an incredible spiritual partnership between love and self, which is love, but in a way that love becomes so creative that every human being who finds this is a completely new expression of love. And so love is never, it's all the time growing and expanding, and it's always in the moment, never out of it. It's,
I built this program really around one central question, which you addressed beautifully, and it was basically, are we who and what we think we are? And I love how you were talking about a moment ago, um, that for most of us, perhaps we really don't have a clear picture of our divine nature.
you would, most of us, you would have to say only about 99.9% have no idea at all. You know, I hear many New Age speakers, and I could admire them, and they have passion and they have everything. but you can always tell the difference between whether it's words or reality. I don't believe the ordinary public can, but I can pick the difference between they have the words of it or the reality of it. And what we have today, and this is not a criticism, it's an observation, we have today an incredible intellectualization or the intellectualism of spirituality. And the intellectualism of spirituality is not spirituality. It's the words, it's the concepts, it's the ideas, it's the theories, but it is not the reality. The reality of spirituality is very quiet, and it's simply living it, and you don't need to be known. I'm the most famous unknown person you've never heard of. And none of that matters because you are who you are, and you're a part of life. And if life needs more from you, then that comes toward you and opens up for you. And if it doesn't, then the way it is already perfect. And I do a lot of counselling with people. It's not my favourite thing, but I do quite a lot. And what I find is every single problem always comes down not enough love. Not enough love for self, not enough love for life, and not enough love for the people in their life, which is all the same thing anyway.
Yes, a source I trust very much is often saying, thinking is not the same thing as knowing. Thinking is thinking, and knowing is knowing. It's experiencing. And so along that track, I wanted to ask you, how would you recommend if a person is interested in essentially following the path that you've laid out, how can a person access their divine potential and begin to experience it and, most importantly, be it?
Okay, well, the thing is, you have to stop living subconsciously. Whoever it is, they have to stop living subconsciously. Generally speaking, the most of humanity spend about each day 90 to 98% of their day living subconsciously. Subconsciously means you're not conscious in the moment. You're living subconsciously. We can do that intellectually very well. And then intellectually, we live in a way that is what I would call a program. We have the program of the past, the more of the same. And the intellect never seems to know that it's repeating everything endlessly. Life after so-called life, incarnation after so-called incarnation. I say so-called because we are continuity. And simply because the body comes to an end there's nothing called death. We continue. And so we get this illusion of beginning again and again and ending again and again. And anything with beginnings and endings, or anybody who has that idea is still playing with illusions. And so when you live consciously, you can choose love. And my big message to the world is choose love. And so what I'm recommending to people all over the world is we each have two thumbnails, or pretty well all of us. And I suggest people paint them a bright green because your heart chakra is a nice strong green. And so every time you see those green thumbnails, then you just, for one moment, I choose love. And it doesn't, you can even do that to yourself. I choose love. But you're conscious. It's never going to be a subconscious act. But the green thumbnails are the prompters. And so gradually, the more in a day, let's say 100 times a day, you consciously choose love. In that moment of choosing love, you're touching the eternity of your life. All the so-called past lives and all the so-called future lives, which all occupy the same space, in that moment, you are connecting with every life and you're changing your whole past. People, you can do that. I walk metaphysically, I can walk down timelines and watch them change because everything of life is in this moment. And so every time you say, I choose love, you're empowering consciousness and you're taking away energy from your subconscious program until gradually, depending on where people are with us, gradually you get to the point where it becomes the most natural thing to choose love. When somebody smashes into your car, I choose love. So you deal with it, but you don't deal with it from anger and revenge. And I've got to have money for this. You've got to. This is going to cost you. In a coffee house, somebody serves you, and instead of being pleasant, they're unpleasant and serve you with a nasty, aggressive manner. And you realize this person is loveless. You know, they don't love themselves. How could they be nice to me? And so you just choose love with them, and you give them a smile. And and every confrontation in your life, and instead of self-criticism, people criticize themselves all day long. Those thoughts, are subconscious thoughts, are based in self-criticism, and that is an attack. You can watch it metaphysically. It attacks the heart. And so what do we have? Heart disease, one of the big things in the Western world. And disease means out of harmony. And so any thoughts that attack take us out of harmony. And when we're out of harmony, we begin to get sick. And so all the time you're gradually changing the program by choosing love and choosing self-appreciation, choosing self-worth, choosing self-respect, and respecting other people and appreciating other people and respecting your life and appreciating your life and your body. Looking at your body in the mirror and saying, well, it doesn't matter about all the hangy dangly bits. This is and that transforms everything. If it transforms a moment, then you're on the path of pure creativity, and that's a beautiful place to be.
Michael, let me ask you this. From the traditionally held point of view of time as a linear concept, the basics of reincarnation, in that sense, they seem pretty straightforward. Our actions, our choices in one lifetime influence the events in the next. But now, as you said, if you accept that time is not linear, that the past, present, and future actually are existing simultaneously in the now, then the choices that I have made and are making and ever will make are actually happening now. So, what is the role of karma and reincarnation then?
Well, the role of karma, I think, is just something, I mean, it's no more than cause and effect. And if you live in the moment, then cause and effect are finished. But of course, generally speaking, nobody lives in the moment. But the physically, the idea of reincarnation, which is real physically and on a linear level, is well, only a few people really accept that in the world of our Christian world, particularly. But people get the idea that the past is finished. The man on the street, the woman on the street says the past is finished. You can't change it. Many times I've taken people and shown them how they can change the past, because the past is the past. Anything in the past unresolved is unresolved now, and because the past and the present occupy the same space, you can resolve it now. And so with many people I've shown them how to resolve um, a past experience. Like, for instance, if you have a cause 2 or 3 so-called lifetimes ago, then you can heal that in the moment, because this is the moment where it deals with. And there are ways of doing that. Consciousness does not know the difference between a powerfully imagined reality or a physical happening reality, because there is no difference. And so if you put passion and what I would call emotional imagination into finding out, for instance, first what happened, that's got to be the first criteria. And then you just rerun it. Now, what happened doesn't matter, but what your emotions were and how your consciousness was at that time is how it's going to play out. So you simply rerun the experience, and this time you change it in the ways that you need to change it, with a lot of emotion and a lot of passion, using what I would call emotional intelligence. You change it, and immediately, if you had the effects from that in your body as a disease, it's quickly gone. If it hadn't been that way, I would no longer be alive. I changed something from 3 lifetimes ago, and because to tell you this story, it's not a common one. I had a stomach problem develop somewhere around the bowel area. And for 3 years this went on, and I'm not known to go to the doctors easily. I generally go there. I figure that you tend to go there when you want to be certified dead. I have a lot of respect for them, but for those who deserve that respect, and not all of them do. And and so after 3 years, I was having bowel motions about 6 times a day and a continuing stomach ache. And I knew bowel pain. And I knew, okay, something's wrong. So I put myself, I focused in the pain and went down like a tunnel and came out in a big, massive mansion house. And I'll just keep this short. There was three people in this room, and there was Francis, who was myself. There was Albert, who was my friend, and my daughter, who I have no idea of her name. And I was a very miserable, unhappy, aggressive, angry man who had lost his wife to an accident on a horse, which she had ridden, one of mine. And I took it out on everybody, and I didn't handle it well. And so there was an incident between Albert and myself, and we had a duel. And he was obviously better than me because he wasn't trying to hurt me. And after about 10 minutes, I said to him, okay, this is ridiculous. I apologize. We had sabers, but behind him, a curtain drew apart. The man appeared, somebody I'd sacked unfairly, treated badly, and he had a crossbow and he aimed it at me and fired. And the bolt hit me straight in the tummy button, right in the navel. And I fell over, and of course, it killed me. And Albert went after him. And I had an obsession for order, cleanliness. And yet I was interred, I was put into the family vault with this bolt still in my stomach, in my intestines, in that area, and everything in there was churned up and broken by the bolt. And I stayed there for ages trying to get this bolt out of this body because I couldn't get it. And I realized when I came out of this, it wasn't the bolt and killing me. That was not the problem. It was my obsession to get the bolt out of my stomach and to get it, to clean it up. And so I never tried anything like this before, but I knew the theory was that if I went back, time doesn't exist. And if I went back into my emotional imagination and recreated it, maybe it would heal me. And so I went back and I had to do the whole scene again, exactly as I started, thinking, oh God, I've got to be shot again. I mean, it didn't actually hurt, but it was a strange feeling rerunning it. And so once again, this thing hits me in the bolt. This time, instead of Albert running to chase the assassin, I shouted to Albert, cut this bolt out of my stomach. And so in my imagination, I imagined him coming back. I put a lot of passion and energy into this. He took his knife and he cut my stomach because I was dead. And he took out the bolt, and I, with my imagination, pushed all the guts out. They could clean up the floor. I wanted this body clean. So I pushed everything out, and then I'm jumping around in my imagination. Yes, 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 I've done it. Yes. So I put power and passion and emotional energy into it. And then I came out of the experience. The pain disappeared within the next hour, and I never had pain come back again ever. That was the end of it.
Wow, what a dramatic experience that was.
Changed the past, and I've shown other people how to do this, and we've had some quite spectacular results. It's not something I go around doing. My focus today is absolute love, but it's not something I think I know all the time occupies the same space, and therefore anything of the past unresolved, you can resolve it now. But how many people would believe such a thing?
Well, speaking of that, do you agree with the theory that anytime we make some kind of choice, even a trivial one, that we're creating multiple parallel realities where every choice that we could have made, we in fact did make in another reality? Or do you see that or?
I think no, not quite the same way.
Mm,
I see probability patterns. And there are all life is probability patterns. We're not destined to do anything, but there are probabilities that run strongly. For instance, if you were to suicide in about 6 lives, the probability is you will suicide in this life, because the same sort of pressure will be back on. People think you suicide once. Nobody in the 21st century is suiciding for the first time. There's a pattern that they found to run away from, which takes them back to where they ran away from. Maybe a different scene and a different year, but it's the same pattern repeating. And so their probability becomes very strong that under pressure, the probability is they will commit suicide. That's a strong probability. So we all gradually, over our millennia of so-called lifetimes, we all create probabilities. And many of the probabilities that we might have done play out. But they don't play out forever. It's like the probability you choose is the one you give energy to. The probabilities you don't choose will still play out for a little while, but they no longer have your focus and energy. And gradually they run down until finally they become a nothing. But that probability's worked its way out, if you follow me. In other words, where you focus, energy flows. And in your life, you make a focus, you choose or you don't choose. Not many people choose. Most people live their lives from reactions. And so when you live your life from choice, you've got to be very free to do that. You've got to be out of the boxes to choose what's there in the moment, even choosing love. You can't do that from reaction. You can't do it from anger. You can't do it from resentment. All those things take away your choice. And so old patterns, choices that you make are the ones your life path follows, and they're very empowered. Choices that you have made may be for quite a number of lifetimes, but you didn't make this time. They will continue, but gradually they have no energy in them, and gradually they will fade away into an etheric non-substance reality until they come to an end, because you didn't follow that choice through. But you followed it enough. It's like if you put the brake on a train, it's not going to stop instantly. It's going to keep rolling until it runs out of momentum.
Well, I guess the question comes down to the choices that you didn't make. Let's say you had the opportunity to either, as you had pointed out earlier, be angry and seek out revenge for perceived hurt, or to forgive. So let's say in this lifetime you've decided to forgive, but then there's also then a potential parallel reality where you reverted back to revenge. So this gets confusing to me because I think, well, then why is karma attached to any decision if I'm essentially making every decision at the same time? You understand what I mean?
I understand what you mean. Again, this to me gets rather intellectual. The life you're living is the one where you're focusing. And when you're no longer focusing into the old patterns of the past, they will only run as long as the momentum of the past carries them, and then they fade away. So if you make a decision, revenge means nothing, I'm going to follow a path of love, then you make that decision. You've just chosen the greatest power there is, and that will empower your life and the direction. The old pattern and it could run for many lifetimes of revenge. The old pattern will run itself out, but it'll run down until it has absolutely no meaning and no energy, and it's finished completely out.
Ah, I see.
Just the same as putting the brakes on a train. It's equally when we're talking about forgiveness. You know, I was in Germany a little while ago, and they asked me to give a talk on forgiveness. And I said, well, you know, I don't really believe in forgiveness. I believe in not blaming. And if you don't blame, then you've no need to forgive. If you accept responsibility for yourself, what have you got to forgive? There's nothing to forgive. You don't even need to forgive yourself because you did the best you could in that moment. And I said, as long as we forgive, then we're going to keep blaming, because forgiveness and blame hold hands. And it's just a cycle that goes round and round and round. And so, how about if you take responsibility for yourself and you do not blame, and then you've got nothing to forgive? In other words, the path of acceptance, it is as it is. And though forgiveness has had its place in life, the path of acceptance doesn't blame, and therefore doesn't need to forgive. So people say, but you've got to forgive yourself first. Then, before you're going to forgive yourself, you've got to blame yourself and say you did it wrong, whereas you probably did the best you could. And so, if you just simply say, today I am who I am and I choose love, then it continues from there. It always used to intrigue me, Steve, that the so-called story, and I don't know how true it is, of the Christ on the cross and two or three beggars. And one of them says something, can I join you in the kingdom of heaven? And he's reputed to have said, repent, and you can join me. Well, there's no more crash courses for him. He's not going to do any more seminars. He can't go back through his life and ask everybody to forgive him, and whether he said repent or not. But I suspect that what he said is accept yourself for who you are in this moment, and you can join me, because who you are in this moment is a being of love and life. And so in that one moment, the way I read it, that this guy, and I'm not a Bible reader, but this guy it was all gone. There's nothing to forgive. There's nothing to take away. In that one moment, he joined with a completely different state of consciousness. And this is where it is. All life is the growth of consciousness. And basically what's happened is like with this 2012 thing, with basically what's happened through the millennia, we have grown intellectually, and several millions of people have grown in consciousness as well. But as a species, we've grown intellectually, but we have not, as a species, grown in consciousness. And so you see the stupidity of the intellectualism that destroys our land, that creates sources of energy that can basically wipe out all life on Earth, that pollutes the air and the oceans and fights itself continuously. There's always fighting and killing. That's a low consciousness. It's not a high consciousness, and yet we're clever. And so there are the millions who have grown intellectually and have grown in consciousness. But as I say, and I'm repeating myself, but as a species, we haven't done that. As a species, we have stayed with a fairly low consciousness instead of growing. And nature says, we don't do this, because everything in nature is growing in consciousness. Everything, the whole structure of the movement of life through consciousness, through nature, is to grow in consciousness. And we're the one exception that's not doing this, and I say this very carefully, with the exceptions of many millions of people. But they are very few out of the many billions of people.
Well, we're recording this interview on July 1st of 2012, and I'm curious whether you view this particular time as offering any kind of special opportunity for humanity to make new choices, as you're speaking of, and to shift into a new awareness, a new being.
It's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of hype going on about it, but I'm personally one of those who subscribe that I think the choice is being taken out of our hands. The intellect is not going to choose change. It never does. The intellect is addicted to more of the same. That's the choice. It doesn't matter how our technology grows, the person using it is the same person who had no technology a few centuries ago. Essentially the same person. To me, there's two things in life. One that works, one doesn't. That doesn't work. And so what does work is growing in consciousness. Now, dimensions. What people don't seem to realize, every dimension there is a level of consciousness. So let's take three-dimensional. Three-dimensional consciousness is a bit like a book. And so there are quite a number of levels of three-dimensional consciousness. We happen to be on one particular page. And I feel that we're living in a time where those who have continued, let's say it this way, through the millennia of our incarnations, of our continuity of self, through the millennia, we have all been making choices, subconscious, conscious, or no matter how, we've been making choices. And generally, everybody has chosen a direction or created a direction. And the direction is either to the positive of human nature or to the negative of human nature. That's the way they've been going. and that we've reached the point where these two have been together, positive and negative, for millennia. But very gradually over the last century, they've been moving apart. We're moving to the point now where suddenly they're moving in two different directions, still connected, but in two different directions. The positive, which we'll say is represented by love, and the negative, which is more represented by fear. There is no opposite to love, none whatsoever, but there is opposition. And generally, that's us. We are the opposition to love. And so, right now, to my perception, there is a dimensional shift taking place. And there is a fourth dimensional reality already opening up. Now, that means physically nothing changes. But on the metaphysical level of us, and our metaphysical is our thoughts, our mental body, our emotional body, our astral body, our etheric body, all those subtle bodies, which are always continue, will, if they move into the fourth dimension, will have a greater power, a greater energy, and a greater self-determination. If they're not moving that way, and that's a positive, then let's probably say as many as 85% are moving back into a deeper embedment, becoming more deeply embedded in three-dimensional reality. Now, there's no right or wrong here, no good or bad, no punishment, no reward. It's simply that as we create life, so we live it. And so all those millennia of our lives are reaching the point, you could say, not of harvest, but of a directional shift. And so as this fourth dimensional reality opens up, so that could lead, and there are so many probabilities. As a metaphysical traveler, I've looked at so many probabilities, and they change almost every week. I look at them and they're changing more and more. I think there is a strong probability of galactic intervention. I think there's a strong probability of complete global financial collapse, which would have huge repercussions on the way we live in our Western world. Probably a Kalahari Bushman would say, did anything happen? But I think that a polar shift could take place quite easily. But they will have how it will affect us is our state of consciousness. So there's not, whatever happens, there's not going to be one effect on all humanity. It will affect us according to our state of consciousness. And there's no rights or wrongs or good or bad of this. I see a probability of a mass ascension of maybe millions of people, unprecedented in human history, although we've done this many times before. This is probably the fifth or sixth time round we've done this. And what is an ascension is no more than the fact that, as physics will tell us, we are made of light. That's what we're made of. And it's no more than that light under the influence of love, moving out of a three-dimensional reality and moving into a fourth and fifth dimensional reality, opening up. Because obviously, Steve, already, it's only physical that we're three-dimensional. We're already multi-dimensional beings in who we are. And so the multi-dimensional being that we are, when that becomes empowered, then simply the physical takes that stronger expression and becomes lighter, and anybody looking would see a person gradually disappearing with an illumination around them.
So then what I hear you saying is that an individual's, let's call it vibrational level, their consciousness, where they're at spiritually, will determine whether they go to the fourth, the fifth, or perhaps remain in a more deeply embedded third 3D type of reality. For those of us that go to the fourth or fifth, how will our lives be different? What do you foresee? Can you paint us a picture?
Let's get one thing clear first. This won't depend on what we know. This will depend on what we are in our heart, in our relationship with ourselves. If our relationship with ourselves is a loving one, a respectful one, and one full of appreciation, that's the relationship we have with life and other people. In other words, it's always been this way. Our relationship with ourselves is our relationship with life. And so we could be, and forgive this anybody who's listening who's a Catholic, we could be a Catholic with completely strange and false beliefs. We could be an agnostic, an atheist with no beliefs whatsoever. We could be a Buddha who looks at this and says this is all rubbish. None of that makes any difference if in their heart that person is a person who lives from a place of love and compassion for themselves and others. That's all that will determine. So it's nothing to do with knowledge. A fifth dimensional reality, I spend quite a bit of time visiting, and I've written about it in my books, particularly the last book. And the fifth dimensional reality, there is no individuality in the way that we perceive it. The physical, the fifth dimensional physical body, of course, is a higher vibration, but that is at one with the metaphysical being they are. And so there's no division between them. In other words, the duality is gone. Individed duality, individuality, the divide has gone, and you have a person very much one with themselves and therefore with life. And so a people who therefore live hundreds of years because they don't age the way we are, the way we do. I mean, it's interesting. If we didn't attack ourselves mentally and emotionally, we should live 140 years. All animals live 7 times longer than it takes to develop the physical body. So it takes us 20 years to develop the physical body. 720 is 140. Not many around because everybody's involved in self-criticism, self-comparison, judgment, the whole lot. Anger. Anger is like an incredible attack on the self. It doesn't go out there, it goes straight in here. And I mean, there's billions of seriously angry people on this planet right now, and worse, beyond that, in a rage. And so when you go to fifth dimensional reality, that's all gone. So let's just say there are 3 types of human. There is the subconscious human, there is the human, and there is the potential human. So in a fifth dimensional reality, there is no subconscious human. That's gone. So there's no base humanity left. It's human, potential human, all the time moving, and the bar gets raised all the time, always, all the time moving up to our potential. And the potential of a human is vast. It's incredible. I mean, we are, we've got a tough job on this 3-dimensional reality. I look at humanity with enormous respect. I travel the world not because it's what I most want to do, although I love talking with people, but airlines today and the whole procedure doesn't make that easier. I could be very happily at home in my beautiful garden on my mountain top, and I'll still be the person I am. But when a flower opens, it's inclined to share its fragrance. When a human opens, they're inclined to share their truth and their love, and this is what I follow. And so in a fifth dimensional reality, everybody is in that state of consciousness of a very loving. I mean, there's no police force, there's no locks on doors, there's no force. Everything comes from an inner power. For instance, when I were with some people there, we would go to travel somewhere, and even though I'm there metaphysically, they can actually see me. Which is, they can't do that in a 3-dimensional reality. Dogs and cats can, but people don't. And so this friend of mine, he had a belt on and with a stud on it. And a bubble appears around us, and though we travel a big distance, and we did it like that. Now, I was metaphysically watching my surroundings, and I realized, hang on, we haven't moved, but we're there. How can we not move and be there? And I said to him, how do we do this? We're there, but we haven't moved. He said, well, we didn't need to move. All we did was take away the space between us. That is, in fact, just a greater illusion that we don't need. And so when you go into their cities, they spread out enormously. Their cities are like a city in a vast forest. And the forest is almost aware. And they grow their houses. I've watched it happen. They grow their homes. You couldn't say house, because although the homes are not sentient, they are aware and they have a symbiotic relationship with the land and the people who own. Although when I say own, I don't mean possess. We have possessions. They don't have possessions. They have ownership, but no, there's no attachment to it. And so they have specialists, one who specializes in the etheric kingdom, another one who specializes in human emotional imagination, and another one who specializes in the connection with nature, and another specialist in the astral realm. And these combined can literally create a home out of those elements, which is the basis of all life. Now, you couldn't do that here, but in a fifth dimension, it still looks three-dimensional, but they can control gravity. And so you can see buildings that are grown this way, and they're still three-dimensional, but they do impossible things because they can control the gravity. So when you say what's life like there, very different.
Well, yes, I gather from what you're saying, it's not being leisurely around and playing harps, and there seems to be an element of a job. I mean, do people have tasks? Do people have duties, responsibilities, learning, etc.?
They don't have jobs as such, but each pursues the interest that is natural to them. And that interest is always holding the potential of growing in consciousness. So everything you do there, you're not given a job, you do this, you do that, but everything you do is at that level of consciousness, you have a natural inclination towards an area. So when you go into a higher consciousness place, you find that technology is nowhere near in your face like here. The lower the consciousness, the higher the technology, oddly enough. The higher the consciousness, the more they use that, and the lower the technology. And so they pursue their interest. Their relationship with nature is way beyond theirs. So you see a tree, shall we say, at night, completely illuminated. But if you connect with the consciousness of that tree, the tree is like enjoying this experience. You know, a tree doesn't have emotions, but as far as you can, the energy of the tree is enjoying it, but the the consciousness of that tree species willingly cooperated with humanity in using, shall we say, phosphorescence from a sea creature to help the tree become illumined, and equally the sea creature received a treatment that it was willingly cooperating with. And so where we today manipulate nature, they take it far beyond with complete cooperation. They have sports, but their sports are based utterly in cooperation. There's absolutely no competition, and yet their results are beyond whatever our sports could achieve. And you sort of think that took a bit of getting your head round. How can you have sport that isn't competitive? Well, they do it, and it isn't competitive. It's based in achievement, but everybody wins, and it's just a completely. It's when we reach our highest potential, that's for them where you begin it all, and it goes up from there. So you would be there and you would do whatever most your natural tendency is. You would follow that to a higher and higher level. And instead of doing it through adversity and sweat and strain and money, you're doing it because this is you expressing your love and your creation.
Hmm.
And that's wonderful.
It does indeed sound wonderful. You mentioned briefly galactics, intergalactics. Have you spent much time contemplating life outside our little planet here?
Well, I don't spend, I mean, you know, if you've read my books, I do a lot of traveling metaphysically, and I've met many, many other beings. Physically, never, but metaphysically, many. And certainly, we share this galaxy with a lot. You know, we're certainly not a species on our own. And all the hushed up spacecraft stories, etc., etc. There's a big conspiracy going on here to keep people in ignorance of a greater truth, because then you lose power when you realize that the powers beyond this our little three-dimensional reality far greater. It's like right now there are many people from a fifth dimension here to make sure that we go through the change that allows them to become fifth dimensional beings. And so there are galactic, yes, interesting.
Yes, yes. Maybe you could take that again.
I've been down my own timeline to make the changes that allow me to be the person who could go back down my own timeline. In other words, I went down my timeline when I awakened to make the changes that allow me to become the person who would awaken and go down the timeline that would allow me to become the person who awakened. You get it?
I do indeed. Wow.
Question, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? The answer is consciousness comes first.
Well, yes, and it also gets back to this whole issue of time being an illusion. You know,
Time as we know it, yes. Space as we know it, yes. There's no distance between this Earth and the stars. I mean, they're within hand's reach. But luckily, we don't do it that way. We have to do it the three-dimensional way, and that way there's a lot of space which we have to fly over.
Michael, this has been fascinating. I understand that you have a new book that's just come out. Can you tell us about that?
Yep, I will actually have a series of books of my recent, what I would call metaphysical adventures, and they're called Through the Eyes of Love. So there's book one, there's book two, and now in the ebook, they're all in ebook, but in ebook, book three has just come out. So it's available from pretty well all the ebook stores, and that talks of my metaphysical adventures, my journeys into fifth dimensional reality, into the earth, and a whole lot of things that I do. I sort of like to investigate stuff where you can't go physically, we can go metaphysically. I never quite, a long while ago, I realized that we are not prisoners in a body. The body doesn't contain consciousness, consciousness contains a body. And of course, every cell contains consciousness, but consciousness, in fact, contains the body and every cell and permeates it all. And so if you're not in a prison, why live in a prison?
And what's the title of that series or that book, so we can find that?
Sorry?
What's the title of this latest book?
Book is Through the Eyes of Love, book 3.
Ah.
And then next we'll be working on book 4. So the series I'm creating, all based on my metaphysical exploration of life. And book 1 and book 2 are there, and now book 3 is there, and it'll be physically available by post, by mail order from Australia and America in late August, and it'll be available in German and other languages, French and other languages next year.
And how can people learn more about your story and keep up to date? Do you have a newsletter, website? Are you on Facebook, for instance?
On Facebook, yes. Michael Rhodes, ROADS, the type you drive on with your car. And my website is michaelrhodes.com. And there's a lot of literature there. And, you can subscribe to a newsletter online. And yeah, I travel the world. This is my 21st consecutive year of traveling the world. And the only place I'm not really, the only place, one of the places I'm not really very well known is America. Would you believe it? And in Europe, I'm kept very busy.
Well, we would like to see you spend more time here in the States with us.
Well, we'll see what happens.
Well, thank you again, Michael, for being so generous with your time and for sharing this extraordinary information with our audience. As always, we invite viewers to leave comments and questions on the Soul Adventure TV website or on YouTube or Facebook. And please feel free to share this video. This information is meant for everyone. So until next time, this is Steve Crow, your host, wishing everyone an enlightening and fulfilling soul adventure of their own. Bye-bye.